Her mother-in-law demanded she cook during labor, but what she did left everyone frozen. Sandra grips the kitchen counter, another contraction rippling through her swollen belly like a tidal wave. The pain steals her breath, but Margaret's voice cuts through it like a blade. "The roast won't cook itself, dear. David's family expects a proper meal when they arrive to celebrate the baby." Sandra stares at her mother-in-law, water trickling down her legs onto the pristine kitchen floor. She's been in labor for 6 hours, but Margaret insists the contractions are just practice pains because first babies always take forever. "Margaret, I think my water just broke." Sandra's voice trembles, one hand pressed against her lower back where the pain seems to live now. Margaret barely glances up from arranging flowers in a crystal vase. "Nonsense. You're not due for another week. Besides, labor takes at least 12 hours for first-time mothers. You have plenty of time to get dinners started." Sandra wants to scream. She wants to call David, but he's at his office 40 minutes away, probably buried in some corporate presentation. Margaret confiscated Sandra's phone an hour ago, claiming she needed to focus on being useful instead of dramatic. The next contraction hits harder, and Sandra doubles over, gripping the granite countertop until her knuckles turn white. Through the haze of pain, she sees Margaret's disapproving frown. "Really, Sandra, your own mother managed to cook Thanksgiving dinner while in labor with you. Surely you can handle a simple pot roast." Sandra's mother died when she was 12, but Margaret never misses a chance to invoke her memory as some impossible standard. Sandra bites back the urge to tell Margaret exactly what she thinks of her comparisons. Instead, she reaches for the refrigerator with shaking hands. The cold air hits her face as another wave of pain crashes over her. She's done this dance with Margaret for 3 years now, ever since she married David. Keep the peace. Don't make waves. Be the perfect daughter-in-law. But as she pulls out the heavy roast, something shifts inside her, beyond just the baby. Margaret has been orchestrating this whole day. She arrived at 7 this morning with an overnight bag and a list of expectations. "David's brothers are driving in from Chicago with their wives," she announced, settling into Sandra's living room like a queen claiming her throne. "We need to show them how well David chose." Sandra was already having mild contractions then, but Margaret dismissed them with a wave of her manicured hand. "Growing pains. The baby's just getting comfortable." Now, as Sandra struggles to lift the roast from the refrigerator, Margaret realizes Margaret knows exactly what's happening. The woman raised 4 children. She's not ignorant about labor signs. She's just cruel. "Don't forget to season it properly," Margaret says, not looking up from her flowers. "David's father always said, 'I made the best roast in 3 counties. I suppose we'll see if you can manage something edible.'" Sandra sets the meat on the counter, another contraction building in her core. This one feels different, more intense, like her body is preparing for something Margaret can't control with her sharp words and cold expectations. "I need to call David," Sandra says, her voice steadier than she feels. "Absolutely not." Margaret's tone could freeze water. "David is presenting to the board today. This promotion means everything to our family's future. You will not ruin his career with your theatrics." Our family. Never Sandra's family. Never their family. Always Margaret's domain where Sandra is just a temporary resident who can be evicted at will. Sandra opens the spice cabinet, her hands trembling as she reaches for the salt. Another contraction hits, and the salt shaker slips from her fingers, shattering on the tile floor in an explosion of white crystals and glass. "Now look what you've done," Margaret snaps. "Clean that up immediately. The family will be here in 3 hours." Sandra stares at the mess, something cold and sharp crystallizing in her chest. 3 hours. Margaret's timeline suddenly makes perfect sense. David's family gathering isn't about celebrating the baby. It's about proving Sandra's inadequacy. Margaret has orchestrated this whole day, timing everything so Sandra would fail spectacularly in front of the people whose opinions matter most to David. But Margaret made one crucial mistake. She underestimated what Sandra is capable of when she stops trying to please everyone. Sandra kneels carefully, picking up the larger pieces of glass. Another contraction rolls through her, stronger than before, and she breathes through it while Margaret watches with cold satisfaction. "Hurry up, dear. The roast needs to be in the oven within an hour." Sandra stands slowly, cradling the glass shards in her palm. "You know, Margaret, you're absolutely right." Margaret's eyebrows arch in surprise. "I'm sorry." "About the roast, and the timing, and showing everyone exactly who I am." Sandra smiles, and for the first time in 3 years, it's not the diplomatic smile she wears like armor. "I think today is going to be very educational for everyone." Sandra walks to the trash can, depositing the glass carefully. When she turns back, Margaret is watching her with the first flicker of uncertainty Sandra has ever seen in those calculating eyes. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean I'm going to cook the most memorable meal your family has ever had." Sandra opens the spice cabinet again, running her fingers along the bottles. "In fact, I'm going to make sure they never forget today." Margaret's frown deepens. "You're being very strange, Sandra." "Am I? I thought I was finally being useful." The next contraction hits like a freight train, and Sandra grips the counter, breathing through it while Margaret watches with growing unease. When it passes, Sandra continues gathering ingredients with methodical calm. "Perhaps we should call David after all," Margaret says, her voice less certain than before. "Oh no." Sandra looks at her mother-in-law with eyes that have shed their polite mask. "You said labor takes at least 12 hours. We have plenty of time." Sandra begins preparing the roast with careful precision, even as contractions come stronger and closer together. She seasons it exactly as Margaret taught her 3 years ago, during those first months when she still believed she could earn her mother-in-law's approval. "The secret," Margaret had said then, "is in the timing. Everything must be perfect or you'll disappoint everyone." Now Sandra understands the real secret. Margaret never intended to be pleased. The impossibly high standards, the constant criticism, the way she moved into Sandra and David's lives like a colonizing force, it was all designed to keep Sandra small, grateful, and desperately seeking approval she would never receive. But Sandra isn't that woman anymore. She hasn't been for months, actually. The change started slowly, during those quiet evenings when David worked late and Margaret offered her running commentary on everything Sandra did wrong. Sandra began to notice things. The way Margaret's stories about David's childhood never quite aligned. The way she spoke to service workers. The subtle ways she undermined Sandra's confidence while presenting herself as helpful. Sandra slides the roast into the oven just as another contraction peaks. This one steals her breath completely, and she has to grip the oven door to stay upright. "Sandra," Margaret's voice carries a note of actual concern for the first time all day. "I'm fine," she manages, though they both know she's not. "Just like you said, practice pains." But as Sandra sets the timer, she makes her own calculations. The roast will take 3 hours to cook properly. David's family will arrive expecting a perfect meal and a gracious hostess. Instead, they're going to walk into something else entirely. Sandra pulls out her laptop, ignoring Margaret's questioning look. "I need to check something," she says, settling carefully onto a kitchen stool. Her fingers move across the keyboard with purpose. She's not researching baby names or nursery decorations. She's looking up something much more interesting. 3 years ago, Sandra was a successful marketing executive with her own apartment and a healthy savings account. When she married David, Margaret suggested she focus on being a proper wife instead of chasing career fantasies. David supported his mother naturally. Family came first, he said. Sandra could always go back to work later. Later never came. Sandra's skills grew rusty while she played house under Margaret's critical supervision. Her confidence eroded, her savings dwindled. She became financially dependent on David, which Margaret never let her forget. But Sandra never lost her strategic mind, and she never stopped watching Margaret's patterns. Now, as another contraction builds, Sandra pulls up a file she's been working on for months. Bank statements, credit card records, property deeds, all perfectly legal information, all easily accessible through public records and David's carelessly scattered paperwork. Margaret leans over Sandra's shoulder. "What are you doing?" "Research," Sandra says, mildly, "as you know how I like to be thorough." The screen shows a very interesting pattern. For the past 5 years, Margaret has been siphoning money from David's accounts. Small amounts, cleverly disguised as household expenses and family investments. Nothing David would notice, given his busy schedule and trust in his devoted mother. But Sandra noticed. Sandra has been documenting everything. "Sandra, perhaps you should rest," Margaret says, her voice strained. "Oh, I'm just getting started." Sandra pulls up another file. "Did you know David's been paying for your condo in Florida, the one you told him you bought with your late husband's insurance money?" Margaret's face goes pale. I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." Sandra's voice remains conversational even as another contraction grips her. "You're a smart woman, Margaret, probably too smart for your own good." Sandra clicks through more documents, her breathing steady despite the increasing pain. "You've been quite busy. The vacation rental property in Colorado, the investment account in the Cayman Islands, all funded by your loving son who thinks he's just helping his widowed mother with occasional expenses. You have no right to pry into family finances," Margaret snaps, but her composure is cracking. "Family finances." Sandra tastes the words like something bitter. "You mean the finances you've been manipulating while lecturing me about being a burden on David." The kitchen falls silent except for the soft hum of the oven and Sandra's carefully controlled breathing. Margaret stands frozen, perhaps realizing for the first time that the woman she's been tormenting isn't as helpless as she pretended to be. Sandra closes the laptop and stands, one hand pressed to her back. "The roast smells wonderful, doesn't it? I think your family is going to find today very enlightening." "What do you want?" Margaret's mask has completely slipped now, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Want?" She considers this, timing her words between contractions. "I want David to know the truth about his mother. I want his brothers to understand why their inheritance disappeared while you lived so comfortably. I want everyone to see exactly who you really are." "David will never believe you." "David might not." Sandra smiles, the expression sharp as broken glass. "But the IRS probably will. Tax evasion is such a serious crime, especially when it involves hidden offshore accounts." Margaret's face turns ashen. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me." The standoff stretches between them, two women who have been circling each other like predators for 3 years. Sandra can see the exact moment Margaret realizes she's lost control of the narrative. "What do you want me to do?" Margaret asks finally. Sandra considers this, another contraction building in her core. When it passes, she speaks with crystalline clarity. "I want David to know the truth about his mother. I want his brothers to understand why their inheritance disappeared while you lived so comfortably. I want everyone to see exactly who you really are. And if I do that, then your financial creative accounting remains a private family matter. For now." Margaret's mouth opens and closes like a fish. "You can't blackmail me." "I'm not blackmailing you, Margaret. I'm offering you a choice. You can leave with dignity, or you can stay and explain to everyone why you've been stealing from your own son." The timer on the oven chooses that moment to chime, its cheerful sound cutting through the tension. Sandra moves to check the roast, her movements careful but determined. "It's beautiful," she says, genuinely admiring the golden brown crust. "You taught me well." Margaret stares at Sandra as if seeing her for the first time. I underestimated you. Yes, you did. Sandra closes the oven door and turns to face her mother-in-law. You saw what you wanted to see, a weak woman who would be grateful for crumbs of approval, someone you could control and diminish. Another contraction hits, and Sandra breathes through it while Margaret watches with something that might be respect if Margaret were capable of such an emotion. But you made a crucial mistake, Sandra continues when she can speak again. You chose David, not the other way around. I had options. I had a career. I had a life before I decided to build something with your son. Margaret's voice is barely a whisper. What do you want from me? I want you to understand that I'm not going anywhere. This is my home, my marriage, my family. And Sandra's hand moves to her belly where the baby kicks restlessly. I will protect what's mine. The kitchen falls silent again. Margaret picks up her purse with shaking hands, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. I'll call David, she says finally. Thank you. Margaret pauses at the kitchen doorway. This isn't over. Sandra meets her gaze steadily. Yes, it is. After Margaret leaves, Sandra finally allows herself to lean against the counter, breathing through the intensifying contractions. Her phone buzzes with a text from David. On my way, Mom says you're in labor. Why didn't you call me? Sandra types back with trembling fingers. Long story, just hurry. She looks around the pristine kitchen, at the perfectly seasoned roast in the oven, at the crystal vase of flowers Margaret arranged with such care. Everything is exactly as Margaret planned, except for the most important element. Margaret isn't here to see it. Sandra calls David's brothers herself, explaining that Margaret has been called away on a family emergency, but that dinner is still planned. They're disappointed but understanding, promising to visit once the baby arrives. When David bursts through the front door 20 minutes later, he finds Sandra timing her contractions with a phone app, completely calm. Why didn't you call me sooner, he asks, rushing to her side. I tried, Sandra says simply. Your mother thought it was false labor. David frowns. Where is she? She left. Family emergency. Something in Sandra's tone makes David look at her more carefully. Are you okay? I mean, besides the obvious? Sandra considers this question, another contraction building. When it passes, she smiles at her husband, and for the first time in months, it reaches her eyes. I'm perfect. We're both perfect. They make it to the hospital with time to spare. Sandra's daughter is born 3 hours later, healthy and screaming with impressive lung capacity. David cries when he holds her, whispering promises about the kind of father he wants to be. Margaret doesn't visit the hospital. She sends flowers with a card that says congratulations in her careful handwriting, but she doesn't call or ask about the baby's name. A week later, David finds the financial documents Sandra compiled. He stares at them for a long time, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and something that might be shame. How long have you known? He asks Sandra, who is nursing the baby in their bedroom. Months. Why didn't you tell me? Sandra looks at her husband, this man she chose to build a life with, and considers her answer carefully. Because I needed to be sure you would choose us over her. David is quiet for a long time. When he speaks, his voice is thick. I'm sorry. I should have protected you from her. You couldn't see it, Sandra says gently. She's your mother. You wanted to believe the best of her. What do we do now? Sandra shifts the baby to her shoulder, patting her tiny back. Now, we decide what kind of family we want to be. David nods slowly. No more interference. No more putting anyone else's expectations before ours. No more. Margaret calls a month later, her voice carefully neutral. I'd like to meet my granddaughter. Sandra, who has been expecting this call, speaks calmly. She's beautiful. We named her Rose. Rose, Margaret's voice softened slightly. That's lovely. We'd be happy to arrange a visit, under the right circumstances. The silence stretches between them. Margaret understands the power dynamic has shifted permanently, and any relationship going forward will be on Sandra's terms. "I see," Margaret says finally. "I hope you do." Sandra hangs up and looks down at her daughter, who is sleeping peacefully in her arms. Rose has David's dark hair and Sandra's stubborn chin. She's going to be a force to be reckoned with, Sandra can already tell. "Your grandmother is complicated," she whispers to the sleeping baby. "But you'll never have to earn anyone's love. You'll never have to make yourself small to fit someone else's expectations." Sandra thinks about that day in the kitchen, about Margaret's demand that she cook during labor, about the choice to finally stop seeking approval from someone who would never give it. She thinks about the roast that cooked perfectly in an empty house, about the strength she found in her own pain, about the moment she realized she didn't need to be rescued. She rescued herself. Margaret never comes for that visit. She sends expensive gifts on Rose's birthday and at Christmas, but she doesn't call or ask for pictures. It's as if she's decided that if she can't control Sandra, she'd rather disappear entirely. David grieves his mother's absence more than Sandra expected. Sometimes he finds him staring at old photos, trying to reconcile the woman who raised him with the woman who tried to break his wife. "Do you think I'm too hard on her?" Sandra asks one evening, watching him look through a photo album. David considers this, turning a page to show pictures of Margaret holding David's infant brothers. "No," he says finally. "I think you're exactly as hard as you need to be." Sandra nods, understanding. Love isn't always soft. Sometimes it's sharp and protective and willing to do whatever it takes to keep the important things safe. Rose grows into a fierce, curious toddler who asks endless questions and has no patience for anyone's nonsense. When she's old enough to understand, Sandra will tell her about the day she was born, about the strength it takes to stand up for yourself, about the difference between being kind and being weak. But for now, Sandra simply holds her daughter and marvels at how much can change in a single day. How a woman can discover her own power in the midst of her most vulnerable moment. How sometimes the people who try to break you end up teaching you exactly how strong you really are. Margaret was right about one thing, Sandra realizes. The secret really is in the timing. Everything must be perfect or you'll disappoint everyone. Sandra just learned to stop caring about disappointing the wrong people. And that's the end of today's story, my precious listener. Thank you so much for listening all the way through. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if it were to be you? Until next time, stay strong. Love you for real. Bye.